saw a familiar face walking on the avenue, both surprised by the way we looked. The years had changed us too. We smiled and both embraced.
Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Gung HO. It's August, I forgot.
20th,
2018. I'm here with a special guest, Jeffrey Sussman. He's an author. He's a boxing enthusiast. And we're here to talk mainly about our dads, our fathers, who are of the same generation. People say it was the greatest generation.
probably it was.
Yeah.
They certainly went through a lot. The Depression, World War II.
Right. All right. We got up to the point where both of our dads, my dad was in the Army, and there's a photograph of him on leave with my mom, and your dad was in
The Air Force.
the Air Force.
I think at that time it was called the Army Air Corps.
That's right.
Yeah, before they called it the Air Force. And that's a picture of him in his uniform in the Army Air Corps.
And I'll just summarize it. My dad never made it overseas. He was a part of the 9th, what do they call it? Not infantry, tank division, 9th.
Well, there was an infantry division.
He was part of it. It was a tank division.
A tank division.
And he never made it overseas because something terrible happened over here, and that's why he never went. But what happened to him is almost killed him. But what almost kills you makes you stronger.
I hope so.
It made him. He was very strong.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. Anyhow, we started talking a little bit about our dads, and my dad was a boxing enthusiast. I mean, loved boxing, was involved in boxing, and at an early age, he was taking me around to all the gyms in Brooklyn and in Manhattan. Was your dad like that too?
My dad loved boxing. He grew up, one of his closest friends in high school growing up was a man named Abe Simon, who was enormous. He was about 6'4" and weighed 250 pounds when he was a senior in high school. And he became a heavyweight boxing contender. He knocked out a boxer named Jersey Joe Walcott in I think it was 1939, and that made him a contender for the heavyweight championship. And so he fought Joe Louis, I think it was 1940. He lasted 12 rounds.
Wow.
With Louis in his first fight. And then they had a rematch, and Louis knocked him out in the 6th round of their rematch.
He sounds like he was a pretty good fighter then.
He was a very good fighter, but
Yeah.
he was very, very big, and he was a little on the clumsy side because of his size. So, he wasn't, like middleweights can be very fast, and welterweights very fast. Abe wasn't a fast fighter, but he had a very powerful punch. And they have a mold of his fist at the Boxing Hall of Fame.
It must be huge, right?
And someone who I told about it said that it was the biggest fist he's ever seen in boxing. It was just enormous.
And when he knocked out Jersey Joe Walcott was still in his prime, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it was 1938 or 1939 that he knocked out Walcott. And Walcott was a contender at that time for the heavyweight title.
And Walcott almost beat Rocky Graziano, right?
Rocky Marciano.
Rocky Marciano.
Right.
Unbelievable. Anyhow, all right. My dad loved boxing, and whatever he loved somehow became ingrained in me. And later on in my life, I would actually get involved with boxing. But before we go there, I want to talk about, what happened to your dad. We had him the last time he had a factory.
He had 2 clothing factories, and a mafia guy, I don't want to mention his name because he has sons, who was a big deal in the Teamsters Union, operated a division of the Teamsters Union for Jimmy Hoffa in New York. And he also had illegal trucking companies. And he wanted to establish an illegal union in one of my father's factories. And my father almost got into a fight with him. And a couple of weeks later, while we were out at dinner, someone broke into our home and trashed the kitchen. And it was a message, you know, this is just the beginning unless you cooperate with us. And my father went to the head of the trucking company that he was using, and he told him what was going on. And the guy said to my father, he said, you know, I'd love it if you would stay with me, but he said, you know, this guy will not only kill you, he'll kill your wife and your kid too. So, you know, I don't think you have much of a choice. And my father had a cousin who was sort of connected with these people, and he was able to negotiate a deal where they wouldn't unionize my father's workers, but my father would have to hire his trucking company. And my father died 2 years later of leukemia, and his partner was not a strong man, and the mob, they kept raising the rates on the trucking all the time until eventually he couldn't pay what they wanted, and so they started taking over pieces of the business, and eventually they took it over completely.
So, how old was your dad when he died?
He was a week short of his 46th birthday.
And I think you told me he died of leukemia?
He died of leukemia. It was a very long, drawn-out process. It had a very powerful effect on me. From the time of his diagnosis until the time he died, it was 6 months. And there were all kinds of opportunistic diseases he developed during the time, like disease of the pancreas, disease of the liver, and he had these huge blotches that were like suppurating wounds on his face. And I remember he said to me once we were sitting in the living room, he said, people must think I'm so ugly with these things on my face. And I said, and I was trying to encourage him, and I said, you know, people see the real you. You know, they see beyond this. And I remember he lost a lot of weight, and he was almost skeletal. And he couldn't hold down food, and he was getting intravenous transfusions all the time. And at that time, a Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is what he had, only paid for a certain number of transfusions. And after he exceeded the number, they wouldn't give him any more transfusions unless somebody else donated blood in his name. And we had a neighbor, a kid named Eddie Sachs, who went around to all of our neighbors and got them to donate blood in my father's name so my father could continue to get blood transfusions.
So,
But
how often were the transfusions?
Once a week.
And was he home when this was going on?
He got the transfusions at LIJ Hospital on
So he would have to go there every week?
Yeah. And towards the last month of his life, he was in terrible pain. And my mother couldn't deal with a lot of it. And she was supposed to give him injections of morphine for the pain. And she wasn't able to. So it became my job to do that. And the only vein I could find that hadn't burst, because all of his veins and capillaries had burst, were the veins behind his knees. And so twice a day, every day I would inject morphine.
How old were you when you were doing this?
15.
That's pretty incredible.
It was tough. And then when he was in the hospital, I used to go there after class and visit him. And I remember walking down the hallway towards his hospital room and all of a sudden hearing this terrible scream. I didn't know what it was. And the scream continued until I got to the doorway. And the doctor came out and said, "Don't go in." I said, "What happened?" He said, "Your father just had a cerebral hemorrhage." And that was what the screaming was. He was unconscious while he was screaming. He didn't know. And that's how he died. It was a horrible, long, drawn-out, painful death.
So he was, within 6 months of the diagnosis, he's dead.
Right.
And most of the time he was home with you and your family.
Right.
How long was he in the hospital before he died?
He was in the hospital in and out.
But the last
For the
time-
last 3 months, he was in and out. He'd be there for a week, he'd come home for a week, go back, and so forth.
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
No.
So, 15 years old, I mean, that's the kind of thing that now we would say would give you post-traumatic stress disorder.
It did, in a way. I mean, the bottom kind of dropped out of my life for a while after that happened.
What do you mean?
I became very aggressive towards people. You know, because I knew how to fight. I had gotten boxing lessons and so forth. I mean, if someone bumped me on the street, I would push them into the street. I didn't care how big they were. And most people, they didn't respond, you know, like try to fight back with me.
Why do you think you were doing that?
I was angry at the world for how it treated my father. You know, I remember a rabbi from our neighborhood called me and wanted to give me some Bibles. And I said, I don't want them. I said, I don't believe in God. I said, you know, if God is so wonderful, if he's so all-powerful and so merciful, why would he let this happen to my father? I don't want anything to do with you or with God. Just leave me alone.
Did that continue, like your attitude? I mean, I could understand that, being angry at that loss, but what happened with that anger?
It stayed with me for a few years. And I wrote things. I started writing then, and I wrote things that were very angry.
I read a story about your dad.
Right.
You gave it to me.
Right.
Yeah, about the last, I guess. I don't know, but it was very powerful and really affected me.
He was a very good man in many ways. You know, he was tough. He had a short fuse. He could become very angry very quickly. But I remember driving to work with him one Saturday morning when he saw 3 kids beating up another kid in a vacant lot, and he hit the brakes and he ran out of the car and he chased the 3 kids away and he gave the other kid a lift home. And then another night we were in a candy store having ice cream sodas one night, and this kid came running in and he hid in a phone booth in the back of the store, and 3 other kids came running in looking for him. And my father asked them, you know, what they were doing. And he said, we're looking for so-and-so, we're going to beat the crap out of him, blah, blah, blah. And my father had a detective shield that he got from a friend of his. And he said, you know, I'm a detective, and, you know, I don't think you should be doing this. And he bought them all ice cream sodas, and then they left. And after they left, the kid who was in the phone booth, my father asked him if he'd like a lift home, and he said sure. So we drove him home too.
Oh my God. My dad he had a good heart, but he had he was very aggressive. I think he liked to fight in the street and in the ring. The time that you had with your dad before he died like that, was that enough time for you?
No.
No.
No, you know, I think I think a teenage boy needs to have a father around. He becomes his masculine symbol of how to deal with the world. And I had to kind of learn that on my own after he died. My mother's brother moved in with us for a while, and he became that figure for me for maybe a year or two after my father died. But I missed him terribly, and I would think about him a lot for years afterwards.
Were there any other, I call them mentors, any other men that helped you along, that had an effect on your life similar to like a father relationship?
Not until I was in my 30s.
And how did that go?
That was very interesting because I got divorced from my first wife when I was 38 years old, and I was very depressed about it. I had helped her build a very successful business. We were doing terrifically. I wrote 7 books for her and 2 TV shows and was making a lot of money, and it all just came crashing down. And a friend recommended a therapist. I see a therapist. And he turned out to be a terrific guy. He was the son of a mafia guy, and his father had controlled all the gambling in New York for Frank Costello. And he helped me to get restarted in business. And he introduced me to clients. He was really a friend, more than a therapist. And he told me stories about his life, and it was fascinating to me that here was a young guy whose father was very high up in the mob, who could have gone into the mob. His father wanted him to, and he chose not to. He had a real social conscience. And before America entered the war in 1941, he joined the Canadian infantry and fought with them. And then when America entered the war in 1941, he joined the American infantry. And he was badly wounded in the Battle of the Bulge. He carried a lot of shrapnel in one leg. And he told me a story that when he graduated from high school, he wanted to take his girlfriend to the school prom. And his father's boss, Frank Costello, owned the Copacabana and told him, I want you to bring your date to the Copacabana, but you have to wear a jacket and a tie. Don't come dressed like a slob. And he put down a table for him right in front of the stage. And Frank Sinatra was singing that night. And he said Frank Sinatra was just a young guy. He just looked like a young kid at that time. And another time, he said that after graduating from high school, his father and Frank Costello showed up in some fancy convertible, and they were going up to the races at Saratoga, New York, and they took him along. So he had all this exposure to a side of New York life that I found fascinating. And it turned out that a number of his patients were the children of mafia guys who didn't want to go into the mafia, but were kind of torn. He was just a fascinating person and introduced me to a lot of people. And he sort of became like a second father figure to me.
Well, my experience is different. My dad was always working, but there came a time, later on, I got involved in the boxing business, really. And what happened is, remember there was a blackout in 1977?
Yes.
All right. The police arrested thousands of people. I got a call from this lawyer, and he said to me, look, a client of mine's been arrested. I'm out of town. I was just, would you go in and cover the case for me? So I went in, Kings County Criminal Court, and I represented this young man by the name of Miguel Hernandez. Turned out he was a professional fighter. And got him out of jail, and his manager was there, Billy Giles, and he says, Miguel's fighting soon. Here's a couple of tickets. So we went up, me and my wife, Nikki, went up to Harlem to watch him fight. It turned out he was a really talented fighter. He had a really incredible amateur career. And he wound up fighting one of Joe Frazier's fighters, who was another really good fighter. And I took this photo while Joe Frazier was talking to his fighter in the corner. And the fight went 10 rounds, and it was brutal. And Miguel won the fight.
In a knockout or by points?
No, by decision. It was a brutal fight. It was the kind of fight that if you're managing somebody, you don't want him to have that kind of fight so early on.
Right.
When he's a contender, or,
Right.
But so I saw Miguel fight, and then later on, a few years later, he came to see me at my office, and he said that Billy Giles wasn't managing him anymore, and he needed a manager, and I wound up being his manager.
That must have been interesting.
Yeah, but so before I did that, I told my dad, this guy wants me to manage him, and my dad, he was just, he knew he could look at somebody for, a minute or so and know whether they were talented or not. So we went up to Gleason's, right? And we were standing on 38th Street, and they had 2 rings. So we're standing here, the 2 rings. Miguel is in this ring sparring, and another fighter is other fighters are sparring here. And we're standing in the middle, and my dad is watching both rings, and he says, well, Miguel's a very talented fighter. He said, but that guy over there is going to be a champ. And he was pointing at Mike McCallum. And when my dad said that, I got it in my mind that I'm going to manage both of them.
And did you?
I did.
Terrific.
Well, all right. Anyhow, my dad retired. He was 62, and he came to work for me. It was working for me. He was on salary, well, cash, And he actually, so we were spending a lot of time together, and he was helping me. I wound up having Miguel Hernandez, Mike McCallum, and I forgot his name now. Another talented fighter. Mike Martinez, and another one. And my dad spent a lot of time with me. We traveled together. We did everything together. So it was great.
It sounds like it.
So for, I don't know, not even 2 years, but I was practicing law, but he was with me a lot, a lot. And I thought, I came to the conclusion he was my best friend.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
I thought of my father as my best friend in many ways.
He became my best friend. At the same time, I had a trainer. When I took over Mike McCallum, I co-managed with him. He had a trainer by the name of Rocky Davis, and he was the same age as my dad. And he was just a really good person, really good. And my dad and Rocky met, and it was like, they were just like the same, they were cut from the same mold. One was black and one was white.
Like bookends.
Yes. It was great. And
I got to publicize and promote a boxer in the 1980s who I thought was a terrific welterweight named Howard Davis. Did you ever see him?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and he used to train at a gym that's no longer there called the Times Square Gym, which was on West 42nd Street.
I remember that gym.
Yeah, and I used to go and watch him. He was such a graceful fighter and so fast on his feet. He won a gold medal at the Olympics, the same Olympics that Sugar Ray Leonard won a gold medal in. And he was very smart. He used his talent really to avoid being hit. He said the scariest thing in the world is to be knocked out and to wake up, a minute later or whatever, and not know exactly what happened to you. He said that's really scary to figure that you've lost that piece of your life for 1 minute. You don't know really what happened to your brain or anything during that time.
Did he ever get knocked out? I don't think so.
I don't think he ever got knocked out. He was a very good defensive fighter, but he was able to score a lot of points fighting. So he wasn't a knockout puncher, but he was a very good strategic fighter.
My dad, oh my God. So anyhow, he was with me while I was managing these fighters, and I also got to know the owners of Gleason's. It was, Jesus Christ, Bruce Silverglade and Ira Becker. It was and after a while, I decided I wanted to be trained like a fighter, and Rocky trained me at Gleason's.
How long did he train you for?
About a year.
So you became very good at it.
Yeah.
How long ago was that?
This was in the 80s. in the 80s. I was like 42 maybe.
But you knew how to box before that.
Well, I knew, my dad had taught me the fundamentals, but Rocky actually trained me like a professional fighter. And I would do road work every morning.
How many miles?
I do 3 miles every morning before I went to work as a lawyer. And then at the end of the day, I would go to Gleason's and work out.
And how long would you stay at Gleason's in the evening?
Oh, the workout must have been about an hour and a half or more.
And what'd you do everything? A heavy bag, a speed bag, jumped ropes,
I never got proficient at the speed bag. Yeah, a lot of heavy bag, some sparring, a lot. It was really a difficult workout. You would lose like 5-6 pounds every time you worked out.
Oh, it's a terrific workout.
It's incredible. It's soaked completely. But
I mean, it's one of the greatest exercises in the world.
It is.
To train.
I'll end this on a happy note, but it gets sad. There came a time when Rocky said, you're ready for a fight. I'm like 42 years old.
It's kind of old for a fighter.
So he said it would be great, the fighting lawyer. He got my weight all the way down. I came in about 160. And and he said, how much did you weigh the last time you weighed yourself? I said, 133. He said, he says, I took you down too far.
Yeah, that's below a welterweight, isn't it? 130 is below a welterweight, isn't it?
No, below a lightweight.
It's below a lightweight.
I was, he didn't realize I had lost so much weight. So I went home and I told my wife, Rocky thinks I'm ready for a fight. And she went ballistic. You're crazy. You're a lawyer. You get in the ring.
So you didn't do it, I hope.
No, I didn't do it.
And that's good.
I didn't do it.
But Bruce Silverglade is a very nice guy. I know him. He gave me endorsements for both of my books. And
guess what? We're over again.
Oh, we are?
We're going to have to do it again.
It's a lot of fun.
It is. It is. And someday we're going to really appreciate having this.
Old time. Where have my old friends gone? Where are they now? Used to be a walk away in my hometown, but they're so far away, as far as walk can be. But in my heart they're close to. Yes, in my heart they're close to. In my heart they're close to me.